long time ago, I saw the same television show that millions of other guitar players saw. It was probably the single most important television show for a new generation of guitar players. God, it sounds like the Bible. But when I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, I said, gee, you don't have to get in line and do steps like the Temptations. You can pick up a guitar and then you don't have to dance, and you can just, kind of do that. And you certainly don't need a band in the back of you. Anybody can do it. Just learn 4 or 5 chords and bang. And I also love their gimmick. I love that everybody had the same hairstyle. It was fun. It's like then a single image brought to mind the group right away. You don't even have to think of their faces or who they were necessarily, just a kind of a style. Mm-hmm. And it was, the perfect group for the perfect time. They were just a step ahead, not too far. Just their hair was just a little bit longer than everybody else. I went, any longer than that, and everybody thought they were bums or something. But at the time, it was just perfect. And also, they played neat-looking guitars. I had never seen a Rickenbacker guitar before. I never saw a Hofner bass before. Everybody was playing these big, ugly Fender basses. So it was a compact little band. It was a terrific-looking band. And that was in '64, and then it wasn't until '67 that my mother went out and bought me a Kent guitar for $15 from some kid. She bought it secondhand, and the amp was a Premier amp with an 8-inch speaker, or it might have been a 10-inch speaker. And I used to turn that sucker up all the way to 10. Somebody taught me how to do a bar of C, and I played Land of a Thousand Dances, Funky Broadway, every song that ever had one chord for the entire song. You know what I'm saying? I said na 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 na, and just up and down strumming for hours and hours. And I tried different variations, turn the thing up, and then let the guitar touch the amp so that the vibration, goes by, and you got sustain. And I couldn't believe it. Said, "Hey, Mom, watch this." She's holding her ears and it's bleeding. Well, at the time, a 10-inch speaker was louder than anything in the house, and we were kicked out of where we lived. And then the next, well, by that time I had sung with bands, sung with all kinds of various major bands, like the Long Island Sounds, but bands that everybody's heard of, naturally, from Long Island. And at the time, I sounded like McCartney. Hello, everybody, it's nice to be here once again. This is Joel Jadison of the Beatles on WMCA, Good Guys. WMCA was the big station, yeah. And Murray the K's Swinging Soiree was the 5th Beatle. So, I'm really a child of that era, and I wanted to be famous. I never really cared so much about what fingers were doing. I just liked a tune if it grabbed me, if the subject matter was interesting or I related to, or if the chord, or if the changes were interesting. I never gave 2 shits about John McLaughlin, because after I heard John McLaughlin record, I couldn't go away and hum anything. And it's like you're singing in school, and you're sitting there and you're thinking, the teacher's saying, well, you got to do this homework. You don't hum a John McLaughlin tune. Maybe our brains in a million years will be able to do that, but not right now. So being the true primitive that I am, I quickly latched on to such classic groups as the Trogs, and even the McCoys, all the great Steve Cropper tunes, Midnight Hour, all those real nice, simple songs that you could learn instantly and just get a nice beat and back up and you're making music. Mustang Sally, all the great 3 chords. God, never more than 3. But such great variations in those 3. And so those were the first things I started to do. And then as soon as Hendrix came out, I was away. I went to a different place. I didn't care about the Beatles anymore. It was, here's this guy who's actually fucking his guitar and lighting his guitar on fire. I thought the man was insane. And then when I found out that he was coming to the country on the Monkees tour, and then this was the end of all things. So one thing led to the other, and then in 1969 I went away to college, and in 1970 I decided I wanted to write songs. And by this time I've been playing guitar for 3 years, and you fake it. You learn all the riffs that Mountain has. Bam, 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 and you learn I love da 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 da. Whoa. What great riffs. And everybody can sit down and you can figure it out. And I started making up my own riffs and writing terrifically memorable songs like Simple Type. The lyrics of which were, I was walking down the street one day, celebrating the Friday the 13th of May. Then I met a simple type who started to fight. I said, hey, can't you find a way? Do you have to keep on fighting this way? Real great songs that nobody gave two shits about. And I mean, about the 100th song that I wrote, I suddenly realized that not only is it just not enough to write a song, it also has to sound a certain way. Different groups sound in different ways. So a lot of these Beatlesque kinds of songs that you heard were written around that era, from 70 to 72.
Oh, were they really?
Yes. And I was doing those songs in a band, in an old band called Rainbow, which was doing all the music, every single kind of music, and the color scheme of the rainbow, some hard, some soft. And nobody gave two shits, nobody cared. And so in 1972, 73, I met Paul Stanley, and we both decided that he liked the Byrds, and I never cared about the Byrds because I always hated the 12-string, ding, 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 anything but strum. You got to strum like guitar. Right. If you do finger-picking stuff, I said, gee, you're not hitting the guitar, you just, kind of... So it didn't appeal to me. But he loved 12-string, and so we exchanged ideas. In 1972-73, we noticed that the biggest bands in the world all sounded the same. In other words, Band X, you put on one track of Band X to the last track of Band X, and you can tell who the band was because they had something called a sound, which is exactly the thing that we lacked. And every band had an image. Led Zeppelin looked a certain way. There's no short guy with a beard and stuff in that band. It just looks a certain way. And the Stones don't have a blonde guy with a handlebar mustache in the band. They all looked a certain way. And the Temptations didn't have a blonde guy in it either. There was a look. And the Beatles didn't have a bald guy. They all had this, So we took, we kind of looked around, we started throwing stuff at each other and realized that you had to have a look, you had to have a sound. And who were the biggest bands in the world? The biggest bands in the world were the glam bands, the glitter bands. David Bowie, Alice Cooper, even the Dolls would just grab the press completely. They never really made any big dent in the music industry, but the critics loved him because he was something fresh and, not necessarily new, just, he was a different looking man. So we decided that we were going to be four guys, four front men, that were going to step up on the stage and put on the kind of rock and roll show we never saw. We decided to be the kind of band that we never saw on stage. To make up for the inadequacy of being the Rolling Stones with only one Mick Jagger, to make up for the fact of being Alice Cooper with only one Alice Cooper. Because if you're Jagger or David Bowie or anybody else and you've got an off night, goodbye, the band can kiss itself dead. So the point behind KISS was to put out easily accessible music that any garage band in the world could play. And the hardest thing for me is to sit down and write simple songs. It's hard. You sit down, first you got to pick subject matter that's appealing. You can't just write about she was lying on the bed and she dreamt nicely. Nobody gives two shits about that concept. She was lying on the bed and the middle fell out and so we met in her wet jeans or whatever. And the lyric has to be easily accessible. You can't say, and I came flying through the windows of your mind. And nobody knows what the hell you're talking about. So you have to be easily accessible. You have to write chord changes that you could hum. You don't play minors, thanks. Usually never play minors, never ninths.